Listen closely. I'm going to tell you something they discovered in the marble halls of Florence. Something Machiavelli whispered to his mistress while the candles burned low and the wine turned bitter in their cups. It's about the strange alchemy that occurs when a man stops pouring himself into the bottomless chalice of another's indifference. There's an old Venetian legend about a perfumer who created the most intoxicating fragrance ever known. Women would cross continents for a single vial. Men would duel at dawn for the right to gift it. But here's the secret that drove the perfumer mad. The scent only emerged when the bottle was sealed. The moment you opened it, eager to possess its essence, it became nothing more than rosewater and regret. The perfume existed only in its withholding, in the space between desire and possession. This is what modern men refuse to understand, even as the data screams it from every corner. A 2024 study from the Institute of Behavioral Dynamics found that perceived value increases by 73% when availability decreases, not in commerce, but in human attraction. The researchers called it scarcity-induced magnetism, but I call it what it really is: the oldest magic trick in the book of flesh and longing. You see, we've been taught to be fountains, haven't we? Endless streams of attention, validation, availability, text back immediately, double text if she doesn't respond, explain your feelings in nauseating detail, pour yourself out like cheap wine at a wedding no one wanted to attend. And then we wonder why they look at us with the same enthusiasm reserved for yesterday's newspaper. But here's where it gets delicious, where Schopenhauer's porcupines start to dance their careful ballet of needles and need. The moment you turn cold, not cruel, mind you, but cold like marble in moonlight, cold like the space between stars, something shifts in the feminine psyche. It's not manipulation. It's archetypal. Jung would have recognized it immediately. The projection of value onto the void, the desperate human need to solve the unsolvable puzzle. I knew a man once, a sculptor who worked with his hands until they bled, creating monuments to a woman who barely noticed his existence, every piece more elaborate than the last. Marble goddesses with her face, bronze abstractions of his yearning. She'd walk past his studio window, and he'd hold his breath like a teenage boy. Then one day, he simply stopped. Not dramatically, not with proclamations. He just turned his attention to the stone itself, to the satisfaction of creation without dedication. Within 3 weeks, she was at his door at midnight, wine-drunk and philosophical, demanding to know why he'd changed. And the sculptures that couldn't move her when they bore her likeness suddenly became unbearable in their absence. She needed to matter to someone who no longer needed her to matter. The human heart, you see, is a contrarian little beast. The Stoics understood this, though they dressed it in prettier clothes. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private meditations, "Never meant for our eyes, which makes them all the more true," about the power of self-containment, how a man who needs nothing from others becomes strangely necessary to everyone. It's not about playing games. It's about becoming genuinely fascinated with your own existence, so thoroughly engaged with your own becoming that others' validation transforms from oxygen to decoration. There's a perverse mathematics to desire that would make Pythagoras weep. The more you chase, the faster it runs. The more you grasp, the more it slips through your fingers like water, like time, like every promise whispered in the dark that seemed so permanent until morning came. But stand still, become a fixed point in the chaos, and watch how the world reorganizes itself around your stillness. In 2025, researchers at Cambridge published something they called the gravitational theory of attraction, essentially proving what every abandoned lover learns at 3 a.m. Absence doesn't make the heart grow fonder. It makes the heart grow desperate to matter. When you remove your attention, you create a vacuum, and nature, as we know, abhors a vacuum almost as much as a woman abhors being ignored by someone whose approval she thought she owned. But here's the truly sick joke, the punchline that would make Kierkegaard laugh until he cried. The moment you master this cold distance, the moment you perfect the art of magnificent indifference, is precisely the moment you stop caring whether it works. You become so intoxicated with your own solitude, so drunk on the freedom of not needing, that their eventual return feels less like victory and more like interruption. Tell me something, and be honest. When was the last time someone's sudden absence made you question your entire worth? When did someone's withdrawal make you stare at your phone like it held the secrets of the universe, waiting for a message that never came? That's power. Raw, primal, uncomfortable power. And it's yours the moment you stop giving yours away. Solitude is not emptiness. It's the only room where God bothers to visit. Shh. Do you hear that? That's the sound of a man discovering he actually likes his own company. Terrifying, isn't it? More terrifying than any ghost story whispered around dying embers, because ghosts at least have the decency to be external. But the specter of your own contentment? That's the kind of haunting that reshapes empires. In medieval monasteries, there was a practice called the cell of self-knowledge. Monks would spend years in a room barely large enough to lie down in, with nothing but stone walls and their own breathing for company. Most went mad. But the ones who emerged, they had this look in their eyes, not enlightenment, but something far more dangerous, complete disinterest in the approval of men. They'd found something in that crushing solitude that made the noise of the world seem like children arguing over toys. Nietzsche called it amor fati, love of fate. But he was still too romantic about it. What really happens when a man stops fleeing his own company is darker, stranger. It's like discovering you've been living in someone else's house your entire life, and your actual home has been waiting, empty, filled with furniture you don't recognize but somehow fits your body perfectly. I'll tell you about something that happened in Tokyo, 2024. A researcher studying hikikomori, those who withdraw entirely from society, discovered something that made her question everything. The men who'd been alone the longest, the ones everyone assumed were the most damaged, showed brain patterns identical to advanced meditation practitioners. Their amygdalas had literally restructured themselves. Fear of judgment had been replaced by something else, a kind of cosmic indifference that was simultaneously peaceful and absolutely ruthless. You want to know the cruel secret about women's desire? It's not confidence they're drawn to. Any fool can fake confidence with enough whiskey and a good soundtrack. It's self-sufficiency, the kind that comes from spending so much time alone that you've had every conversation with yourself already. You've already been your own prosecutor, judge, and executioner. You've already died and been reborn in the cathedral of your own silence. And now their opinions are just weather. Pleasant sometimes, stormy others, but ultimately external. There's a Russian folk tale about a woodcutter who lived so deep in the forest that even the wolves forgot his name. One winter, a princess, lost and half frozen, stumbled upon his cabin. She expected desperation, a lonely man's gratitude for company. Instead, she found him humming to himself, cooking soup, entirely complete. She stayed, not because he needed her, but because his not needing made her question everything she thought she knew about her own necessity. She became obsessed with becoming necessary to someone who'd learned to live without necessity itself. But here's where modern men stumble like drunks in a hall of mirrors. They mistake loneliness for solitude. Loneliness is the panic of the herd animal separated from its pack. Solitude? Solitude is the realization that you were never a herd animal to begin with. You were something else entirely, something that wears the mask of sociability, but dreams in languages that have no words. A 2025 study from the Vienna Institute of Psychological Architecture found that men who spent at least 3 hours daily in deliberate solitude showed increased gray matter in regions associated with self-regulation and decreased activity in areas linked to social anxiety. In other words, science finally proved what every hermit knew. Being alone literally rebuilds your brain into something more sovereign. The Buddhists have this concept, shunyata, often mistranslated as emptiness, but really meaning openness. It's not about being hollow, it's about being so vast inside that nothing external can fill you because you're already full of space itself. Imagine being so complete in your aloneness that another person's presence becomes a choice rather than a necessity. That's not loneliness. That's the kind of power that topples kingdoms built on codependence. Last month, I met a man who hadn't been in a relationship for 7 years. Not by accident, not from rejection, but from choice. He'd discovered something in those pre-dawn hours when the world sleeps, and only you and the darkness are awake. He learned to cook elaborate meals for himself, to dance alone in his kitchen, to have philosophical arguments with authors dead for centuries. When I asked if he was lonely, he laughed, not bitterly, but with genuine bewilderment. "Lonely?" he said. "I'm having the best conversation of my life, and it never ends." Women would approach him at cafes, intrigued by his quality of being absolutely present yet needing nothing from the moment. He wasn't playing hard to get. He'd become hard to get because he'd gotten himself so thoroughly that there was barely room for anyone else. The paradox that would make Kierkegaard weep with recognition. The moment you become truly comfortable alone, you become irresistibly attractive to others. But by then, their attraction feels like someone offering you water when you're already standing in a river. "Here's my question for you," whispered like a serpent's suggestion. "What would happen if you stopped performing your life for an audience that's not even watching? What if you discovered that the greatest romance of your existence was the one between you and your own solitude?" Most men will never know. They'll die surrounded by people and never once have met themselves. The hunter becomes the hunted the moment he forgets he's also the prey. There's a sickness that comes with wanting too much, and I've seen it rot men from the inside like fruit left too long in summer heat. It starts sweet. That first flutter when she texts back, that electric shock when fingers accidentally touch. But brother, let me tell you how it ends. It ends with you at 3:47 a.m., scrolling through her Instagram from 2019, constructing elaborate fantasies from pictures of her laughing at someone else's jokes, while your life becomes a museum dedicated to someone who wouldn't notice if you disappeared tomorrow. The ancient Greeks had a word, pothos. It means the desire for something absent, but it's more sinister than that. It's the desire that feeds on its own impossibility, that grows stronger the more distant its object becomes. They considered it a form of madness, a divine punishment. Tantalus reaching for fruit that pulls away, Sisyphus pushing his boulder, and you refreshing your phone every 30 seconds, waiting for a notification that will never satisfy even if it comes. Here's a joke that's not funny. A man spends 5 years chasing a woman. Finally, she agrees to dinner. Halfway through the appetizer, he realizes he's bored. The punchline? He spends the next 5 years chasing the feeling of chasing her. In the opium dens of 19th century London, addicts would describe a phenomenon. The dragon. The first high was the dragon, perfect and terrible and divine. Every subsequent hit was just chasing the dragon's tail as it disappeared into smoke. Love works the same way, that first moment of possibility, before reality intrudes with its mundane breath and morning skin, that's the dragon. And men will destroy their entire lives trying to catch something that only existed because it was uncaught. A 2024 neuroscience study from Oxford revealed something delicious. The same neural pathways activated by cocaine addiction light up during romantic obsession. The same. Identical. Your brain literally cannot tell the difference between falling in love and developing a substance dependency. Both create what researchers call incentive salience, the delusion that this one thing will complete you, despite all evidence suggesting it will destroy you first. Let me paint you a picture with blood and velvet. Habsburg, Spain, 1655. A nobleman named Diego becomes obsessed with a courtesan who entertains him precisely once a month, always by candlelight, always behind a silk screen. He never sees her face clearly. He bankrupts himself sending gifts. He fights 17 duels over imagined slights to her honor. Years pass. His hair grays, his estates crumble. Finally, on his deathbed, she visits without the screen. She's ordinary, pleasant, but ordinary. He dies not from disappointment, but from the realization that he'd been in love with silk and shadow, candlelight, and his own projection. The courtesan? She barely remembered his name. This is what we do. We fall in love with the story we tell ourselves about someone, then spend years trying to force them into that narrative like forcing a living body into a coffin built for someone else. The cruelty isn't that they don't fit. It's that we keep trying, keep pushing, keep believing that with enough pressure, reality will submit to our fiction. Schopenhauer wrote that all desire springs from lack, from deficiency, from suffering. But he was only half right. Desire doesn't spring from lack. It creates it. You were complete until you saw her. You were whole until you decided you needed another person to validate your existence. The chase doesn't fulfill emptiness. It hollows you out to make room for an obsession that will never quite fit. I watch men turn themselves into performance artists, contorting their personalities into whatever shape they think will finally make them worthy of attention. They become comedians for women who don't laugh, philosophers for women who don't think, providers for women who don't need. They chase and chase until they forget who they were before the chase began, until their identity becomes inseparable from their pursuit. But here's the most exquisite torture. Sometimes you catch her. Sometimes she says yes, moves in, marries you even. And that's when you discover the ultimate cosmic joke. The thing you were chasing wasn't her. It was the chase itself. It was the sweet agony of maybe, the delicious torture of almost. Now you have her, and the fever breaks, and you're left staring at a stranger in your bed, wondering why your heart feels like an abandoned house, wondering why victory tastes exactly like defeat. The Sufis have a saying, "The beloved is the veil over the face of God." But they're wrong. The beloved is the veil over the face of void. And the chase? The chase is just you running from the knowledge that behind every veil is another veil, all the way down to nothing. A man I knew spent 3 years writing love letters to a woman who never responded. 3 years. Over 1,000 letters. When asked why he continued, he said something that chilled me. If she responded, I'd have to stop writing. He wasn't chasing her. He was chasing his own yearning, in love with his own capacity for desperate hope. So here's my riddle for you, posed like a knife between ribs. What if the thing you're chasing is actually chasing you away from yourself? What if every step toward her is a step away from the only person who'll be there when the lights go out? You? Most men die mid-chase, hearts exploded from the effort, never realizing they were running in circles the entire time. Every relationship dies. The wise man learns to love the corpse. I once met a mortician in Vienna who told me something over absinthe that I've never forgotten. He said the living always look surprised when they view the dead, as if death wasn't the most predictable thing in the world. They knew it was coming, he laughed. Green fairy dancing in his glass, but somehow convinced themselves their love would be the exception. He'd prepared hundreds of widows' husbands, boyfriends who'd promised forever, and every single corpse wore the same expression, surprised that forever had an expiration date. Everything dies. Your passion will die. Your relationship will die. Even if you stay together for 50 years, it dies. Either suddenly in betrayal or slowly in the mundane suffocation of shared bathroom schedules and predictable orgasms. The only question is whether you'll be the mortician or the mourner, the one who prepares the body or the one who refuses to admit it's already cold. The Japanese have a concept, mono no aware, the pathos of things, the gentle sadness of transience, but they're too poetic about it. The truth is uglier and more liberating. Your relationship is already dead. It just hasn't stopped moving yet, like a chicken with its head cut off, still running around the yard, spraying blood on the white sheets you bought together at IKEA when you still believed in tomorrow. Here's what a 2025 Harvard study on long-term relationships won't tell you directly, but implies in every data point. The couples who last aren't the ones who keep love alive. They're the ones who get comfortable with its corpse. They learn to appreciate the skeleton after the flesh has rotted away. They find beauty in bones. Let me tell you about the most honest marriage I ever witnessed. An old Czech couple, married 43 years. She told me after her third wine, "I haven't been in love with him for 20 years. But I've been in something else with him. Something that doesn't have a name because naming it would kill it too." They moved around each other like dancers who'd forgotten the music, but remembered the steps. It wasn't love. It was archaeology. Two people carefully excavating meaning from the ruins of what they'd once built. Kierkegaard wrote about the sickness unto death, that special despair that comes from being unable to die to yourself. But relationships have their own version, the sickness unto life, where you keep pumping electricity through a dead thing, watching it twitch and calling it dancing. I knew a man who kept every text his ex-girlfriend ever sent, 7 years of messages. He'd read them chronologically, watching their love bloom, peak, and decay in real time. "It's like watching time-lapse photography of a rose," he said. "Beautiful, then beautiful in a different way, then dead, then beautiful again in its deadness." He understood something most men refuse to see. The decay is part of the beauty. The ending was always encoded in the beginning. The ancient Egyptians mummified their dead, preserving them for the afterlife. Modern men do the same with relationships, wrapping them in desperate gestures, couples therapy, surprise vacations to places where you were happy before you knew what unhappiness looked like. But mummies are still corpses, no matter how much gold you bury them with. Here's what Schopenhauer understood that modern relationship coaches don't. Love is nature's trick to make you reproduce, and once that biological imperative is satisfied or thwarted, love shows its true face, which is no face at all. Just an empty skull grinning at your delusions of permanence. But here's where it gets transcendent, where the darkness transforms into something almost like light. Once you accept that your relationship is dying or dead, you're free. Free to love without the desperate clutching of someone trying to hold water. Free to appreciate the moment without the anxiety of preservation. Free to touch someone knowing your hand is already ghosting through them, that they're already a memory, that this kiss is already a story you'll tell yourself when you're alone again. A 2024 psychological study from Berlin found that couples who openly discussed the eventual end of their relationship reported higher satisfaction than those who believed in forever. They called it terminus awareness. I call it the mortician's wisdom. Everything is more beautiful when you know it's already dead. The Stoics practiced memento mori. Remember you must die. But they should have practiced memento amoris mortem. Remember love must die. Not to be morbid, but to be present. To kiss like it's already a ghost. To hold someone like they're already sand slipping through your fingers. Because they are. They always were. Last week, I stood in a cemetery in Prague, reading headstones of couples buried together. Together forever, carved in stone above bodies that are very much separate, very much alone, very much unaware of each other's decay. The ground laughed at the inscription. The worms found it hilarious. So here's my accusation, disguised as a question. Are you brave enough to love something that's already dead? Can you dance with a corpse and find it beautiful? Or will you spend your life pretending that your love is the one immortal thing in a universe built on entropy? The mortician in Vienna had one more thing to say before the absinthe took him under. The only relationships that last forever are the ones that ended. Everything felt is just postponement. The door you closed still knows the shape of your hand. Dawn breaks like a promise already broken, and here you are again, staring at her name in your phone like it's a Ouija board that might spell out a different ending this time. 3 months, 6 months, a year of magnificent solitude, and suddenly, at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday that feels like drowning, your thumb hovers over her contact like a suicide note you're not sure you want to send. Let me tell you about Orpheus. Not the pretty version where he's a tragic hero, but the real version, the ugly one. He looked back not because he loved Eurydice too much, but because he needed to confirm she was really there, that his suffering had meant something. The gods didn't punish him for loving. They punished him for not trusting his own emptiness. He could have walked out of hell alone, complete, victorious. Instead, he turned back to make sure his pain had an audience. This is the final test. The one most men fail. The temptation to return to what broke you. To knock on the door of your own haunted house and ask if the ghosts remember your name. I watched a man last year, brilliant surgeon, rebuilt himself after his divorce, learned 3 languages, climbed Kilimanjaro, became the kind of person who reads philosophy for pleasure instead of performance. Then she texted. One text. I've been thinking about you. 7 words, and I watched him dissolve like sugar in rain. Within a week, he was back in her bed, back in her web, back to being half a person, begging for permission to be whole. The neuroscience is brutal in its clarity. A 2025 study from Montreal shows that returning to a former partner activates the same neural pathways as relapse in recovered addicts. Your brain literally cannot tell the difference between going back to her and going back to heroin. Both are a return to a familiar destruction, a comfortable annihilation. But here's the sick wisdom that Nietzsche would appreciate. Sometimes you have to return to prove to yourself that you've changed, only to discover that return itself is proof you haven't. It's the eternal recurrence made personal. You'll keep walking through that door until you realize the door only exists because you keep looking for it. There's a Serbian folk tale about a man who escapes from a witch who's kept him imprisoned for 7 years. He runs through the forest, crosses 7 rivers, climbs 7 mountains. Freedom tastes like copper and starlight. But on the 7th night, he hears her singing in the distance, the same song that first lured him. His feet start walking back before his mind can stop them. The tale ends with him standing at her door, knowing exactly what waits inside, knocking anyway. The moral isn't that the witch was powerful, it's that freedom was too frightening to maintain. The Japanese have another word, tsundoku, buying books but never reading them, letting them pile up unread. We do the same with our exits. We accumulate all these perfect escapes, these clean breaks, these final goodbyes, but we never actually read them through to the end. We stop at the chapter where we're still close enough to return. A woman I knew once said something that haunted me. Men always come back, not because they love you, but because they love the version of themselves that existed when they thought you could save them. She was right. The return isn't about her. It's about trying to resurrect a corpse of yourself that felt more alive in its dying than you feel in your resurrection. Here's what the self-help gurus won't tell you because it doesn't sell books. The urge to return never fully goes away. It hibernates. It waits for you at your weakest, when you're drunk, when you're lonely, when you've just seen her in someone else's smile. It whispers that maybe this time will be different, that maybe you're strong enough now to dance with destruction and not get burned. The Odyssey isn't about a man trying to get home. It's about a man learning that home is just wherever you stop running. Odysseus could have stayed with Circe, with Calypso could have returned to any number of islands, but he kept moving toward Penelope not because she was perfect, but because she was the period at the end of his sentence, the place where the story could finally stop. But you're not Odysseus, and she's not Penelope. She's Circe, turning you into a swine every time you eat from her table. She's the sirens, singing songs that sound like promises, but are really just the sound of your own drowning. A 2024 behavioral study from Tokyo found that men who successfully maintained no contact for over a year had one thing in common. They didn't see it as resistance. They saw it as architecture. They weren't avoiding something. They were building something. A life so full that there was no room for ghosts. The Catholic Church has a concept called occasions of sin, situations that make transgression almost inevitable. Your phone at 2 a.m. is an occasion of sin. Her neighborhood is an occasion of sin. That song, that restaurant, that particular shade of lipstick on a stranger, all occasions of sin. The wise man doesn't resist temptation. He designs a life where temptation has to take 3 buses and a train to reach him. So here's my final question, whispered like a benediction or a curse. When she inevitably reaches out, and she will, they always do, drawn by the scent of your self-sufficiency like sharks to blood, will you have built something worth protecting? Or will you be like Orpheus, turning back to make sure your suffering had a witness, only to lose everything you gained in the climbing? The door you closed still knows the shape of your hand, but your hand has changed. You've changed, haven't you? Haven't you?